let's start off with Andrew from Washington believes that transgenderism is a mental illness. So let's start.
Let's go. All
How are
right.
you, Andrew? Let's go. Oh, did I not click Andrew? Oh my gosh, let me click again.
No,
My
Andrew.
No, he's there. Hi,
How
Andrew.
y'all
I
doing?
apologize.
Hey, howdy.
Doing good. Sorry, I didn't
That's
misclick
good.
there.
I do want to say
Yes.
first and foremost, coming into this, that I do not come in this with any hate or anything that I do say. If it does sound disrespectful, it is not my intention to be disrespectful.
Okay. Thank you for starting off that way. I really appreciate that. So, yeah, so how do you how what is your thoughts? Let's go ahead and
So
introduce your discussion point.
it's a little bit complicated, but I figure we'll get through it as we go. But from my
Mhm.
understanding, gender dysphoria has been a mental illness for approximately a little over 40 years before it was suddenly dropped as a mental illness back in 2019, I believe.
Yeah, when the
Um,
DSM-5,
and I,
it essentially it's like it's a condition, right? Like gender dysphoria isn't like an illness per se. Kind of like when queerness and just being gay was seen as a mental illness, it was later adopted as it is. It's just how people are. So they dropped the
okay,
illness portion because it seems more derogatory when you tell somebody, "Hey, you're mentally ill," for something that just they are.
Yeah.
right,
Like
okay.
broadly, the DSM has
So,
kind of been moving to a point where it's like we're trying to understand like the ways that different people are without necessarily
right,
pathologizing or saying like it's wrong to be this way.
Hmm.
right. And it's a real pain in the butt trying to figure out what each individual person is like,
Mhm.
especially if you do get like mental illness involved. I am somebody that does have a mental illness, and that's part of the reason why I kind of have the belief system that I do on this matter. And I honestly, to make a prediction, I think that the future for transgender individuals is kind of grim if you look at it as it is now. Because right now, as you guys were saying earlier about Joe Biden being a good president for transgender people and transgender rights and all that, and we've really seen kind of an uptick about it these last 4 years. And I'm
Hmm.
not really complaining about that. What adults do with their bodies is up to them. You know what I mean? I don't really care
Mhm.
about all that. It's when we get involved with children that kind of rubs me a little bit the wrong way. But I don't fully understand it, so I'm not out there like picketing or nothing like that and saying anything stupid to make myself look stupid because I don't know the science a hundred
Mhm.
percent.
Yeah, I
But
guess
from
I guess
my
on kind of that point
understanding,
broadly, like the thing that I might want to approach is like so we recognize that gender dysphoria can be like a condition or a mental health condition. Like, do you think it's a good
hmm
idea in general to try to treat mental health conditions in children?
well, that's a I'd say yes, but
Mhm.
when it comes to permanent surgeries and permanent, well, I don't know if the treatment, if the medications that they're given, it actually is
Yeah, well, you
permanent. If
bring
you
up
start them on one, if they can go back
yeah, I
or
think the kind
whatnot.
of
I
point you're
think we
bringing up
should
is like
definitely look at the science, though, and I
yeah, yeah,
don't
yeah.
believe that they changed it based off of the science, though,
If you'll allow me to get a
because
little point in, I think what you're
Yeah.
kind of getting at is that especially when we're dealing with children, we want to like start with any kind of like intervention that's like less invasive, and then kind of work things up from there. Especially because more invasive
right,
interventions might be a little bit scary in the case of kids. Yeah, and so that's why when it
right,
comes to like treating gender dysphoria in children, the first step of intervention is just talking to a gender therapist, kind of exploring your gender identity, exploring
right,
what you really want out of like being a person in your life, being transgender. Maybe you even are cisgender. It's actually very common for kids to go to gender therapy and then just find out they're cisgender and not take any kind of treatment. If a medical treatment is
Right.
prescribed, usually the first line of defense is puberty blockers, which are entirely reversible. You can take them for months to even a couple years, go off of them, and then your body will just restart the puberty process as natural as normal. So I definitely hear your concerns, and this is what the science has done as well. Is they've tried to find these less invasive approaches that are reversible in order to start young dysphoric kids on those kind of procedures before anything else would be considered,
Right.
like maybe surgery when they're an adult, for example.
Now, as I was saying before, though, I do think that it does kind of the future does look a little grim for transgender individuals, which is deeply saddening, because with the transgender community, there are already high suicide rates, and if suddenly the country were to turn their back on transgenders, I would imagine that those rates would go higher for a little while.
Well, Andrew, what
So that's why.
you're yeah, I mean, what you're highlighting is absolutely right, and what I want to emphasize and where you're heading is the reason that our ideation is much higher as a population is because of the bigotry, right? The people not accepting
Yeah,
trans people,
society.
right?
Yeah, right,
Exactly,
right. No, I
exactly,
Mhm.
got you.
right? Yeah, yeah.
Now,
So, mhm,
basically, like, my understanding about transgenderism is it's very strong and very intense feelings and thoughts that the individual is the gender opposite of what they were assigned, or I don't
yeah.
know enough about the non-binary and all that to get into that. But basically, like, that's the gist of it, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
that
that's
is
that's
essentially what makes a person trans, right? Somebody who
Mhm.
doesn't identify with the gender that they were assigned at birth, and that includes non-binary people for the most part.
okay. So that's where it gets me a little screwed up. And again, like I said before, I do have a mental illness, um, and it's the logic that we're using with transgenders, that if it was used for my mental illness, it would just be really crazy. So I
Do you want
have
to elaborate on
post
that a little
traumatic.
bit?
Yes, yes. I have post
Okay.
traumatic stress disorder. I'm an Iraq war
Mhm.
veteran. I had 2 tours of duty to Iraq. Um, I have very intense thoughts and feelings about wanting to kill myself. I've had it for
Mhm.
about 20 years now, every single day for 20 years now. I'm in a
I'm
good
sorry.
spot. Like, I'm so stubborn in my belief system. Like, it got to the point, like, before I stopped believing in God, I used to think, well, God must want me to kill myself, otherwise he wouldn't put these thoughts in my head. But now I
Mhm.
don't even believe in
Mhm.
God, so that don't even matter. But I could always push those thoughts out because, number one, I'm a mama's boy. I was born on my mom's 24th
Mhm.
birthday. We're really close, and I would always say, I can't leave my mom like that. I can't go before her and put
Yeah.
her through that pain.
Mhm.
And then now, I met a lovely woman. She became my wife. We have 3 kids together. And now, it's my kids. I can never leave them behind. They
Yeah.
need me. I have a duty to them. So,
Yeah.
those thoughts about suicide are no big deal. However, my thought about it when it comes to this transgender issue is, if we're saying that transgender, very intense thoughts and beliefs that they're in the other gender is now a reality, then if we use that logic, it would be like saying that I should kill myself and that everybody should cheer
Well,
me for doing it because those thoughts are my reality. And
yeah.
you understand what I'm saying? I
I
know it
do. I
sounds
do
fucking
hear.
grim. I don't
No,
mean
I
to
I I I
be a.
I hear what you're saying, and and these topics are hard, right? These topics are hard.
Right,
I'm
right.
also I served in the Navy. I also have to struggle with my
Thank you for
own
your
bouts of
service.
PTSD, and thank you for yours. And
Mhm.
so, as a transgender veteran, right, for myself, like I
Right.
have to deal with all of the layers of all of those emotions that kind of sandwich on top of each other. And I served during Don't Ask Tell, and it sounds like you did as well.
Right.
And it
Yeah,
was it
for a
was
little bit.
definitely, yeah, yeah, and it was definitely difficult. And so I will
Right.
say this, right? And it's hard. One thing that's always good, and I hear your care for like not wanting trans people to be in danger because you have that own relationship with your own ideation that comes from a different place
Right.
as well. And one of the things that I think is helpful is because sometimes it's really easy to like look at the world and be like, oh my gosh, the world is against the against trans people. This is awful. We need to make sure that we protect trans people from not being ostracized in society because that would put them in a very untenable situation and increase ideation across our community, which is exactly the truth, right? So this is one of those
Right.
things, and this is why I'm happy that you're calling to get more educated on this stuff and actually talking these things through, is because in Washington State, particular Washington State, there's a high level of population of trans people. And when you
Right.
run into a trans person in your life and you accept them, I will tell you this as a statistic that we have been able to find through studies. Knowing one person in your life that is accepting of your gender identity, if you're a trans person, will drop your suicidal ideation to no higher than a cis person. We know that for a
Oh wow.
fact, right? It's the most intense when nobody in your life accepts you, right?
Right.
But you can be that
Right.
person, right? You can be that person in somebody's life that's like, no, I know Andrew. Andrew knows that I'm here. Andrew knows that I'm this trans person that exists, and that is essentially saving
Right.
a life, right?
Mhm.
And so when you talk about trans people and trying to get educated on this stuff and understanding about like society, and that's why I think it's important to go back to that trans kid situation, because in trans
Mhm.
kids it's even higher, right? Ideation points, right? We know
Right.
that in it for a fact. So
Right.
what we have to do is what Naomi said in the beginning, is about trusting the science, the doctors, right? There is an
Right.
entire process that is medical standards that shows that if you're insistent, consistent, and persistent with gender dysphoria, you will start receiving that healthcare and that treatment. And
Right.
those treatments are between a doctor and the family of that trans person, right? Society
Right.
and politics should have nothing to do with the personal relationship that a doctor has with the patient and the family. So when you have these
Absolutely.
conversations, even if you don't understand it, right? You may not understand it yourself and you'd be like, I don't know. But being able to stand up and say, you know what though? The doctors know what they're talking about, and I trust the doctors, and I trust the parents and the families that are dealing with these issues with their children. Just like if you had a child that was sick and you're like, I'm going to trust the doctor and to figure out what's going on with my kid and give them the proper medicine, the proper
Mhm.
treatments that they need to be able to do it. You probably wouldn't like it if some random person was like, I don't think that's what you should be doing with your kid, if a doctor has already said
Right.
otherwise, right? And
Right. No.
that's
No
where a lot
parent.
of trans people.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Yeah.
and
I'm a
one
parent. I
kind of
definitely
follow
don't
up
want
that
people telling me what to do with my kid.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. If I can add like a little bit of a follow up, it seemed like you
Yeah.
you
Go
kind of
ahead.
brought up this idea that like there might be these different mental health conditions and they can have very different treatments, and that is true across like all of healthcare. Really, what doctors and scientists are trying to do is just find out what treatments are best for different populations, what's going to lead them to living the most well adapted, satisfying lives possible. And so, I mean, we could do an
Right.
example
Right.
like ADHD medicine, wonderful for people that have ADHD. If you have bipolar disorder,
Right.
it's probably going to make you go manic in not a very good way at all.
Right.
Maybe we can do like gender
Well.
dysphoria
Yeah.
versus PTSD. Very different conditions have very different treatments.
Right.
And time again, the
Right.
research is just showing that social affirmation and gender affirming care are the best lines of defense for saving trans people's lives.
Right. Okay. So there are some changes that are like already beginning to happen. I'm even seeing it here in my
Mhm.
state, which is pretty blue. So like it's kind of surprising to see it. And on one of the
Hmm.
biggest issues that that society has, I would say, not all of society, because it seems like half the country is, for helping transgenders, and half the country is kind of like, well, hold up a minute. And well, some of them are really bigots. I don't think all of the right are bigots. I think they probably just don't fully understand. And when people don't understand stuff, especially when we're putting each other in groups and all this, like we get back to our groups and we kind of dig our heels in rather than having the conversation. But I do think, like, I feel like the science kind of jumped the gun. I feel like, because if you look back with not just gender dysphoria, but even PTSD, it seems like the science has been taking kind of a liberal approach, and they've been changing the names of these mental health conditions over the years to make them seem, because people don't want to hear that they have an illness or a disorder, and it makes them feel worse. They already got suicidal ideation, and now we're saying that there's something wrong with them.
Well, Andrew,
And
I think
can
it's
get that a little bit.
yeah,
But it got to the
and
point
one thing,
to where we just said, no, it's not even a mental illness anymore. You know what happens
yeah.
when it's no longer mental illness? Don't you kind of lose the treatment for it at the same time?
So,
Obviously not,
yeah.
because they're treatment.
So Andrew, hold. Let me cut in here. There's two things. First, don't use transgender as a noun. So you've said transgenders. It should be trans people, right? Transgender people.
Trans people.
Like that's one. Yeah. It's just a very minor thing.
Yeah,
but
like I said, I'm not trying to be
no.
disrespectful.
I know you're not. I know.
I do have
It's
a bad
completely
memory,
fine.
so if I screw up, just yell at me.
It's okay. I just wanted to let you know, just because you're here in good faith, and we are too. So we're here to all educate and learn, right? So
I do have
the
a
second
transgender
thing,
individual in my family.
Oh, okay. Well, great. Well,
Yeah.
love them and
So I
respect
really
them.
don't want to be disrespectful to anybody.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
thank
absolutely.
you. And that's wonderful. And thank you for accepting that member. Okay, going back to the illness versus the names and the information about it. It's about removing stigma, Andrew. Right. And so when you remove stigma from something, right? Like, for example, as well as I do, you probably have a lot of military friends that don't want to go to therapy, right? Because they don't want to talk, they don't want to think there's something wrong with them, right? They don't want to go to therapy, they don't want to seek any type of treatment, and they're putting themselves in harm's way because they're not going out and seeking that help. Right, because there's like, oh, I don't want to go to a shrink. They'll just tell me I'm crazy. Right, I'm sure you've heard that before, right? And so the reason that we try to make language better and remove stigma off of things is to give people the opportunity to be able to seek treatment and help for something that is more normalized and understood, right? Because if you make it seem like, oh, your illness and that's weird or that's strange and you shouldn't have it, people will pretend that they don't and not seek that treatment to be able to help themselves, right? So that's one of the reasons. Yeah, so that's one of the reasons why science kind of learns and understands that, hey, maybe we shouldn't call these illnesses. We should call these either disorders or mental conditions, which makes it normal. Everybody has mental conditions. Everybody has mental things that they have to struggle with on a daily basis. So it makes it normal for us to go and seek help, right? If somebody was like schizophrenic, right, and you would want that person to seek help, right? But you wouldn't call you're a mentally ill, sick person. You should go and see a psychiatrist to get medication. What is a schizophrenic person going to do? It's like, oh my God, you're making me seem like I'm this horrible demon person. It's like, hey, it may seem like you got a condition. Have you considered seeing a therapist about this thing that that you're struggling with? And then that opens the conversation to something much more friendly. And I don't know, Naomi, if you want to add something to that.
Yeah. I mean, under the condition model, we can still provide treatments for all these conditions. And ultimately, we would want to live in a society where people are most able to seek help. And we have studies showing that this kind of condition framework, this kind of normalizing language actually increases the rates at which people will seek help for these conditions. And I just think that's a good thing for society.
Right. Well, there's like a number of things to that. Like, I can agree that we definitely do need to end the stigma on mental illness, especially mental illnesses that don't fully affect you in your day to day, where you can be like, even with PTSD, you can be normal individual, you just might
Yeah.
have some anger problems, and if
Hmm.
something triggers your anger, you might want to get away from people for a little bit. But a
Yeah.
lot of people, from what I've seen, they see it as kind of force in speech, which is that is
Mm.
unconstitutional. We all have a constitutional right to free speech. And one thing that I would say to trans people is there will always be people that will hate you. And
Hmm.
as sad as it is to say that, we're never going to live in a perfect world. Like, I admire everybody for standing up for themselves and saying, we're people too, and you shouldn't just cast us aside. I admire that greatly, and I'm 100% for all trans people to have the exact same rights as me and every other American in this country. I
Hmm.
think that should be what we always strive to have. But I do feel that there's some battles that we just kind of, we'll just have to accept that certain individuals will never believe the same way we do. It's
Sure.
hard to say where to go
Mhm.
about it, but like the biggest problem is that I see that people have with trans people is in sports.
Hmm.
Basically, the biological differences between biological men and biological women is enough that, like, if you get into, say, combat sports, it really would give a little bit of an unfair advantage. I'm not certain how the puberty blockers work. Like, if you start blockers before you get to puberty, like, I don't know how much that would change things. I would imagine that the bone density differences would still be different or whatever. But I really feel that, like, the best
So.
route to go with sports is because I do want trans people to be able to compete in sports. They
Hmm.
should have every right to do so. So why not make different I can't think of the word, but you know how
Yeah.
we have
Divisions.
biological
Yeah.
man against division, but it's strictly
Yeah.
for trans people. So
Yeah.
it is their peers, and there shouldn't be any biological advantages that way at all. Yet
Yeah. So
these
Andrew,
trans people still have their ability to
yeah,
play.
let me cut in here, and then I will let Naomi answer the sports question. I'm going to
Mhm.
answer the language question, because there was two questions nested in there.
Mhm.
One was about the language, and then you moved on to sports. So I will go into the language part. So one thing that is also, I think, a misconception is that trans people are these fragile beings that if you misgender them, they fall into a puddle and just die, right? And that is not the case, right? When we have these conversations, right, we want people to respect who we are, just like your name is Andrew, right? And if you were to say, no, my name is Bob tomorrow, oh, if you were to say my name's Bob tomorrow, I'm pretty sure people would be like, all right, Bob, whatever, right? And so for
Right,
a lot of trans people, it's about respecting who we are, right? And I think that's where it comes down to.
right,
So I came out later in my life. I was 34 years old when I started my transition. It took a long time for people in my life, a long time for that have been in my life a long time, like my mom, for example, to get around using she her pronouns and my name and all of that type of stuff. I was patient with her, and she cared and loved me enough to actually change her language. But I was patient, and I understood it was going to take her a minute to get there, but she eventually finally got there, and we have a great relationship. Now, one of the things that I think a lot of people do that what irk me as a trans person is people who refuse to use my pronouns because they don't think that they're correct, right? which is
right,
which is now gone into the range of harassment, right? So if you were to say to somebody, no, I'm Andrew, I'm this guy, and this person just kept on like saying, no, you're Jim, and and I'm never going to use he because you're not a man, and like all of that type of stuff, right? You would be like, hey,
Right.
why you so mad at me, right? Like, chill out, man,
Right.
right? And
Right.
it's the same type of situation for trans people. They deal with this a lot, where there are mean spirited people who are intentionally trying to misgender us, not use our names properly, and disrespect us to such a level that makes it harassment, right? And that's
Right.
where I think people say we're not policing any language. It's just that you shouldn't be a dick to people, right? You should be polite. You should be respectful, just like we're being respectful here, Andrew. And so it's not
Right.
that we're policing anybody's language. We're just trying to make sure that people are polite in society, just like everybody else is trying to be polite, right? Like we
Right.
there's societal acceptable behaviors. So before you go on to your
Right.
point, I'm gonna pass it over to
Uh,
Naomi so she can answer your sports
oh yeah, yeah,
question.
yeah. Right. Right.
Yeah,
Right.
so
Yeah.
I
Go ahead.
think the trans sports issue is definitely one that's really complicated and nuanced, and that's why we've got a lot of like sports medicine scientists who are really kind of tackling this issue. And I really like that you brought up the idea of puberty blockers. This is actually like a really promising future direction, because if we kind of think about like what creates these biological differences between men and women on average, it's due to hormones. Like we talk about, like going under a testosterone dominant puberty is going to really change your body, help you build up muscle, all these kind of things. Meanwhile, if we were to take, say, like a trans woman who goes on puberty blockers such that she never goes through a male puberty, she would have never had an opportunity to get any of those kind of advantages. And so,
Right.
especially like in the longer term future, like puberty blockers and hormones being able to be given to trans youth, like so they can actually go through the puberty they want to go through, will also eliminate any potential biological advantages, which is really, really cool. And then in cases where somebody might have transitioned later in life, there's going to be a lot more kind of nuance going on here. And that's why sports medicine scientists are doing some really careful analysis comparing, like, okay, say a trans woman has been suppressing her testosterone for 3 years. How would she compare to, say, a cis woman, someone who was a born female, still identifies as a woman? How would she compare in performance to this woman? Say if she had like a naturally elevated testosterone level. I know this is becoming another recent discourse we've seen kind of in the Olympics. There were a couple of cisgender female athletes that were born with naturally higher testosterone levels, and people are calling them men and saying that they shouldn't be allowed to compete. And ultimately, the Olympics has
Oh
come up with
well.
rules. Things for like you have to have your testosterone within like a certain range for this amount of time. There's medicine that people can take to get within those ranges, and ultimately they're just trying to come up with the best, most inclusive and fair policy as possible, because there's not going to be a perfect solution that exists. I know you mentioned the idea of having like a trans only league, but as it turns out, most sports, there's not enough trans people that play sports in order to do trans only leagues, unfortunately.
Right.
And so, it
Right.
sucks that there's no perfect solution here, but we're just trying to do as best we can. And,
Right.
really, I trust the sports medicine scientists, especially those working at really big organizations like the Olympics Committee, to be able to make these decisions as best as possible. And it seems they're doing a
Yeah.
really good job. I mean, we can also just like
Yeah.
look at historically, like there hasn't been any instances of like a trans person who has competed in a cross-sex league and then won a medal in the Olympics. That's never happened yet. So it
Yeah.
seems that
That's
there's not
true.
really any issues, especially at these really high levels where they've really got a lot of like sports medicine scientists coming up with clever, nuanced, crafted policies.
Yeah, and the leagues
Right.
are the ones taking care of it. But Andrew,
Mm-hmm.
we have been on a call for a while now. So we should be wrapping up, so we do got full phone lines. Is there any last
Yeah, that's
things you want
fine.
to
I
say?
kind of
Y-
yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just on the sports issue. The reason why I brought up the sports issue is even in my state of Washington, which is pretty blue, my town just came out and they banned transgender athletes from
Mm,
performing
Mm-hmm.
in the sport in the category of their identity. So now it's set
yeah,
to
that's
biological
unfortunate.
sex.
Is that
And
a high
I see
school? Is
this.
that
I
like a
think
high
it's
school
gonna.
thing?
Oh no,
Is
this was
that
an
like,
elementary. Well, no. It was the entire school board for the entire city. So it's
oh,
all
that's
through
so sad.
K through
Yeah.
12. Yes. But I do see this happening more and more. It happened in another city in the state. What it feels like
Hmm.
to me is it feels like kind of science kind of jumped the gun with stop calling it a mental illness, and then now it's just reality. and everybody's kind of just going like chickens with their heads cut off, trying to figure it out. That's why I say let's create their own divisions for now. Let science catch up. If we prove that the blockers can make them no different than the other sex, then let them go ahead and we'll go back to what it was. I don't have all the answers, but just a thought.
Sure. Yeah. Well,
y'all gotta go.
Yes, absolutely. And call back again. I will say this, though, just on that very final point, is that we haven't seen a domination of transports at all. No one's jumping any guns. In fact, I would say that the guns that are being jumped are the ones of the people putting these laws into place before there's ever an issue. And it's really sad because, when they pass these blanket bans, especially in K through 12, is that these are affecting maybe a handful of kids, if that, and there is no competitive level of sports that is happening where people can be in any type of danger. And so we're working about inclusivity, right? Because if you were to put a sports league that is only trans in K through 12, then those kids again wouldn't be able to play soccer, right? Because there wouldn't be enough of them, right? They wouldn't be able to play basketball. So it basically does the same thing of excluding trans people from sports, because there wouldn't be a sports team that could hold that many trans people as well. And so we've seen that there is no societal need for it, and a lot of times, and I actually work in policy, a lot of times in politics, the only times that they do these things is trying to win political points, right? Where there's an extremist side of a wing that says, I'm going to get a win and I'm going to target a class that doesn't have a lot of protection, and then say they're the problem, so they can say I did this one thing to score points with extremist portions of the base. And so that's what we see more often than science moving too quickly. And I think that Naomi and I could probably think that science moves too slowly a lot of times.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. So, but Andrew, thank you so much for the call.
Oftentimes it's the public is trying to catch up to where the science is at. I know you mentioned you didn't really know a lot about the subject. A lot of people, like we said, jumping the gun on this, they just have no clue about what the state of the science of sports medicine science, of athletic performance and hormones. We've done a lot of research on this subject. People just don't know about it, and they kind of jump to biases and not really looking into it. But I really appreciate the call. Appreciate the opportunity to talk through this. And you were great to speak to. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew.
Thank y'all. Just real quick, I want to say I know I can't see y'all, so I don't know what gender, what pronouns y'all use. I believe both of you use female. I know I said you guys a couple of times. That was just
no, that's fine. I know you're on the West Coast, but I get it.
Also, as far as stigma, I'm with y'all on trying to end stigmas on mental illness. I try and be honest about mine as much as possible, and it usually turns everybody away. But
thank you for normalizing it. Again. Yeah, for sure.
Oh, absolutely.
Please do.
All
right.
I just want everybody to have equal rights.
I agree.
Absolutely.
Bye.
Bye.
All right. That was a good call.
That was not what I was expecting, but I enjoyed that.
Learning in like good faith calls like that is a really good way to move people in the middle, because it is a real time like, hey, I just want people to be equal. It's a perfect example of what it looks like to have conversations from shared values, right? When you start with shared values, conversations, even if they could be a little bit in disagreement at the beginning, will always, in my opinion, land in a good place. So yeah, thank you again, Andrew, for calling, for sure.
Hey, what's up? I'm glad you enjoyed that clip of people talking to each other. I'm Jimmy, and this is Eric, and we'd really love it if you would support us. Where can they support us, Eric? Where would they do that?
I don't know, Jimmy, because I don't have the notes on me right now.
This is too long. The outros have to be short. Patreon.com/call the line.